In part one of this video series, I offered the Godshuis as a potential model for elderly living in the 21st century. In this second video, I'll explore the history of this urban form and look at why it was never built in America. The history of the Godshuis begins in Bruges and dates to the 14th century. Today, 45 of those Godshuis still exist, with the earliest example dating from 1330, which is still in use today. This is De Moliniere, which we saw in part one, a garden courtyard formed by 24 small houses built in 1613 for elderly women in need. So a few facts about the Godshuis. They were built specifically for elderly. They were built by wealthy donors, and housing and daily food were part of the endowment of the place. They were free. Only prayers were asked in return. Here's the same Godshuis from above. Having spent time in Godshuis, I'm struck by a few things, especially the significance of the front door as a reflection of the individual and home, pedestrian access to the needs of daily life. So here's the entrance. You can see here's the entrance to this Godshuis right here. Here is it in our aerial view. And if you walk out of here and then walk down the street by about 20 to 30 seconds, you're going to find a bakery, a grocery, restaurants, and a pharmacy, all within just a few steps of this elderly community. And the final thing that is striking when you step into a Godshuis is the sense of peace, quiet, and home that are found here. This is another Godshuis in Bruges, Godshuis de Crozier. There's 12 small houses around this courtyard here, and a chapel here built. The whole thing was built in 1912 and was one of the last Godshuis to be built in Bruges. And I would just point out, look how it's nested inside the block. So here's our block. Here are our main streets. Here's the entrance to this Godshuis, and it's nested there. Here's our entrance from the street and the interior of this Godshuis built in 1912. By the 15th century, this model of elderly housing had reached the Netherlands, where it was called a hofje. The hofje, like the Godshuis of Belgium, were built by wealthy community leaders and not by the city or state or church. The hofje were often built to form garden courtyards like the Godshuis, but they were also arranged as streets. And so here are two hofje streets in Utrecht in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, this historic urban form of the hofje has recently begun to be built again. One group is called Knarrenhof. They write of themselves, Knarrenhof is the combination of the courtyards of the past with the convenience of today. This creates a unique concept of safe living with a lot of privacy and at the same time, all the advantages of living together. It is ideal for the modern senior who wants to remain independent and who can rely less and less on informal care and children. Almshouses have existed in England for over 1,000 years, but this was different than the Godshuis or the hofje. The almshouse was charitable housing or poor housing for people of all ages. It was often institutionalized and included mandatory work. There was not the direct connection between the benefactor and the resident like there was in the hofje or the Godshuis. And where hofje or Godshuis today has an extremely positive association in the Netherlands and Belgium, almshouse historically had negative associations in the English-speaking world. So finally in America, 1729, the Friends Almhouse in Philadelphia, which you can see here, was built for the poor of all ages, right? And I would ask the question right here, so is this a Godshuis? This looks a lot like the Godshuis or hofje. In 1767, the Philadelphia Almshouse was built, and that's this one right here. And note the difference in these two. Right, the Friends Almshouse is at the scale of the hofje or Godshuis. There's not a fence around it. There's not the institutional feeling. This is an almshouse, but it looks like it could also be a school or even actually a prison. The Philadelphia Almshouse did have a mandatory work component. In 1846, the Friends Almshouse was torn down. That was the closest we in the United States came to a hofje or Godshuis. In the bottom, this is St. Francis Villa, 40 affordable senior units built by Catholic Healthcare Services in 2015. Is this a Godshuis? What makes a God's house a God's house? To answer that question, in part 3 of this video series, I will introduce a recently designed project that seeks to bring the God's house into the 21st century in America.